All right, let's see if we can wrap up these last three here for ninth and 10th grade Progym exercises. 5 and 6 definitely go together as a pair. And if you're going to do them, I would certainly urge you to do them together, probably in the same homework assignment, the same task. Have the students do them together. Don't make it, you know, November we'll do this refutation, December we'll do confirmation. No, put them together because that's really the point of these two, especially, is to put them right next to each other for comparison and contrast, right? And so, this works really well. I found a lot of success with these two, even in 11th grade, like with the Fall of the House of Usher or some story like that, so that has some length to it and takes students, a day or so to read. Then you can really elaborate on it. If there's enough content in the short story, you can really approach these two activities really well for a longer short story. Maybe a novel, but sometimes the novels are maybe too long. You want a really good maybe a long narrative poem or a good short story really works well for these two. Like it says, myth or a legend, um, historically in the past, but you could certainly broaden that out to a really good short story. Okay, and these two, especially of the three steps, it really works well if you stick to those three steps for both of them and have the students take it methodically, 1, 2, and 3 for the refutation and the confirmation together, and it makes for a really good mental exercise and a literary sort of practice because these two really are the heart of senior thesis, right? The refutation, opposing other viewpoints, and confirmation, proving your own point. These 5 and 6, I think, are two of the most important exercises of the whole course, really, of preparing the students for thinking in not just dialectically but rhetorically for the rest of their lives. And so 5 and 6 definitely are worth doing and worth doing maybe maybe not multiple times in the same year, but if you do it in ninth or 10th grade, maybe again in 11th grade would be helpful because they do it in a greater detail for 12th grade and senior thesis. Okay, so they go together, but they are distinct, and focusing on the distinctions are important, right? The refutation uh, in the thesis we do it in the opposite, really. Usually confirm before refuting, but it's a little easier to do the refuting as a mental exercise for ninth, 10th graders than it is because, unfortunately, in our fallen sin nature, it's easier to tear down than it is to blame to praise. It's easier to blame than it is to praise. Is what I'm trying to say in English here. So, looking at the three steps here. It begins with blaming the storyteller, and again, you're not necessarily going for overtly vituperative language. You're talking about like what we did with Fall House of Usher. This first one is looking at Edgar Allan Poe and a brief sort of biography sketch from a negative thing. Like Edgar Allan Poe had made many mistakes in his life. He had many bad choices. He had gotten himself involved in exploring the darker side of humanity. And so this story comes from a really bad place. And so if you're asking the students to think of the same subject matter from two different ways, right? So this first one, you're thinking of the story from a negative perspective, blaming the author. He shouldn't have been telling stories about darkness and the macabre, things like that, right? And so the summary, you give a brief paraphrase, a summary of the story, but from a negative sort of way. Again, not encourage the students not to be overly negative, but from a critical perspective, without no name calling or things like that. No broad generalizations that they can't really support. Certainly, it's not that kind of. They don't need practice in doing things like that, right? But a summary of maybe highlighting some of the flaws. The summary I would always keep pretty short because the real uh, the best part of these exercises is the third step here. And I would always have the students do all 6 of these sub categories here, right? So a brief, maybe one paragraph biography, sort of a critical biography, a critical summary, talking about these unlikely things happened, and then for no explainable reason, then this happens, and then it ends with a very ambiguous ending of morality and things like that. And so then you get into the specifics of the third part is, and maybe not I would never really have them do as a cohesive paragraph. I would a paragraph certainly for 1 and 2, but for 3, I would always have them do bulleted points, right? And so sentences, yes, but still bulleted points. You of course can do it differently, but um, just so they have a visual thing of, oh yes, I have done all 6 of these steps, okay? But the backslashes, or are they forward slashes? I don't know. I would treat them as one unit, right? Some variation. Give specific examples. This activity is really great for really focusing, having the students focus on drawing specific examples from the stories. So this task really works well for if students are struggling, like give me good specific reasons why the characters, the stories like this. These 2 activities are really great for making the students practice that really important skill. All right, so give me specific examples from the story of when the story was obscure or muddled or unclear. One of those are 3 variations on one idea. Okay, and so give me a specific example of that. You could even go a little bit further and having the students elaborate on why it was. Sometimes we did that, sometimes we didn't, depending on where this assignment was happening in the flow of the school year. But you could do that, or you could just have them give one specific example. It was unclear why this character did this because, and maybe 1-2 sentences tops, right? You could make it longer, but 2 sentence specifics of these really, I think, worked really well. Give me a specific example of how the story was incredible. They're not quite the same. I mean, students might look at them initially and say, well, aren't these all 6 things pretty much the same? Yeah, they're similar, but the real great use of this activity is they're not exactly the same. And so it requires the students to look at very specific details and how they phrase how these examples fit these different categories. Okay. And so be strict in the students in saying, this one is unclear, this one is improbable, this one is impossible, right? If you look at them from that perspective, this is a degree of likelihood, right? It's uncertain. This is less likely, but still possible. Oh, this third thing, this could never have happened, right? And then inconsistent, like from perhaps a rational point of view, whether it's probability or not. And then, or even the bottom 3 of these subpoints could be more moral, right? Inconsistent, irrational, improper, unfitting. For as a Christian, we shouldn't read a story like this that has examples of a sister getting buried alive and rising from the grave in the fall of the house of Usher, right? Like, Christians shouldn't be reading this sort of thing because it treats resurrection from the dead in a very sort of casual and improper way that as Christians we should think of it in a different way. Something like that, a very specific example, and that shows the students is drawing this kind of moral judgment on this specific example really works well. Inconvenient, improbable, maybe even the whole story. On the whole, this story is not probable, and that this could almost be like a conclusion, but it doesn't have there's no step 4. So these 6 sub points really work well if you do all of them. Okay, and then similarly for the confirmation, it's that you do the same story from a just opposite perspective, right? And look at so you're praising the storyteller. Edgar Allan Poe was so creative; he could fabricate a story about this, and always dealt with the macabre and the supernatural in such riveting ways, and things like that. Praise them, praise the story. Students want to skip over this second summary a lot, but don't let them skip over it. The point is again to retell the story, but from a positive perspective. And so their adjectives change. Maybe the brief moments that they highlight in their summary are different in this positive thing than in the negative one. So don't skip over the summary because it's not exactly the same thing, right? And then again with the bulletin subpoints of number 3, have them do all 6, but don't just do the opposite examples. Have them pick different examples of, while this is clear, it's a clear story because we have a consistent beginning, middle, and end. We know how it begins and what the author is feeling or the narrator is feeling the whole time. Right? It's likely how if a family behaved this way, they their reputation in the house could fall into ruin if they stay, things like that, right? And so pick different examples and then make this, you could even, again, make that last bulleted point could be almost sort of a mini conclusion. I never had the students write, a real conclusion to this paper, because the point of these exercises are to really hit those specific, uh, you know, 6 areas of how the story is good or bad and things like that. So it doesn't need to be a cohesive paper with a traditional introduction and conclusion. Focus on the key elements of these two activities, and these two, especially if you pair them up, will be, I think, can be very successful for the students and their writing ability, even if they, you know, don't like the meticulous, highlighting different individual things. It really is a great, this pair is really great for them. Okay. And so the last one, uh, I'm out of praise. Now I said all these great things about 5 and 6 and 7. I never really had a lot of success with myself, and so the commonplace one is probably my least favorite of the 14 here. Of course, we didn't really do anything about laws or anything, but of the 12 or 13 that we try to do, this one really just was, for whatever, maybe it's just me and my poor teaching skills, but this one had, I modified this assignment probably more than any in 15 years at Summit, probably. So I can't really give you any good advice on this one. It's, even though it's very well laid out in the parts, and I think if you want to do this one, and you probably should have the students try it, this one just, I hope you have much more success with this one than I did. Um, but it is pretty similar to uh, the CREA, so definitely make sure the students have experience with that one first, and maybe in the proverb too, for a lesser extent. But it would be probably helpful if they did it, this one, maybe in a different year from the CREA, so they have that background. You can refresh them memory on it, and then it's got all these pretty detailed categories and subparts here. It has almost a traditional introduction. Go through these six. There's like 8 of the steps, and the things like that. And so go through the 8 steps, maybe have it, you practice yourself, maybe what you really want the students to get out of it. The key aspects are certainly, 4, 5, and 6, and 7, and 8 is sort of your conclusion, right? And so those middle steps are pretty helpful. And maybe it was just because it's so similar to the CREA that maybe internally I didn't feel like it was that useful, but its subject it's different. I think part of the challenge is that the point of this activity is supposed to be, you're talking about something that everybody already believes in and already knows. Like, you're trying to convince the audience of something that they already believe in, and so you're talking about, this virtue is great and we should do it, and this vice is bad and we should avoid it, and the audience probably already knows. You're not trying to prove something or persuade them to do something different, right? That's the nature of it. So it's good practice in one sense in dealing with commonplace values of what people already know, and give students good practice, or it's supposed to give students good practice on amplifying, here's what you believe in and here's why it's a good thing that you believe in that. But I think maybe for the 21st century, this idea is very useful and certainly it's good, but you might want to, sort of like I did, you have to adjust sort of the parts to it, because in part because it's so similar to the CREA, and because just life and society, yeah, sin and goodness and rightness are obviously still the same, and God is unchanging, true, but society is different, and the way we look at things, the way we communicate is differently, and so this one especially, maybe modify this one for how you need it for class and the students that it's a good one to practice in the basic idea of what this task is about. But like, I don't know if it's not the most helpful way to end this series of talks, but make it your own. Let's frame it positively. Make this one your own. Feel free to draw upon the centuries of how this has been used, but make this one especially your own. Okay, so I hope these brief little video chats have been useful, and from my perspective, I sound very enthusiastic and exciting. I know they don't always come across in the video, and I'm sorry about that, but sorry if the lighting is not so great here. But I got a brand new computer, and still trying to work it out here. But thank you for hope this was helpful, and certainly email me, contact. Glad to help any way I can. Keep my ties with Summit going strong. So thanks again, and talk to you soon. Thanks.